Who would have imagined that you would not only have front row seats to watch the fall of the American Republic, but it would look a little bit like this?
President Biden?
You can see he is 6'5" and only 223 pounds, or 235 pounds. Well, you said 6'4", 200. Well, anyway, that's it. Anyway, just take a look at what he says he is, and take a look at what he is. Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. The reason I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie. He's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have, you know how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
Okay, let's
not act like children.
President Trump, we're going to
21
turn.
Let's not act like children.
So, a little succinct summary of where we're currently at. The race for the President of the United States of America, the world's only, albeit rapidly decaying superpower, is between a president who is clearly no longer mentally capable and who, crucially, has facilitated a genocide, and a racist far-right demagogue who threatens the future existence of the American Republic and who would accelerate this genocide. What a hideous choice facing the US electorate, and a damning indictment of the US political system. And I would note a Democratic establishment, Democratic Party establishment, which has brought us all, the world, to this point. Now, of course, Donald Trump lied all the way through, as is his modus operandi. He lies and lies and lies and lies and lies. And the liberal establishment has never had a strategy to deal with this, constantly forcing them on the defensive and allowing him to set the parameters of debate. Let's just hear some of CNN's fact-checking, crucially, after the debate.
The Trump list, it is way, way longer. So deep breath. He said some Democratic states allow people to execute babies after birth, an egregious lie that is illegal in every state. He said everybody, even Democrats, wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. Roe was supported by 2/3 of Americans, even more Democrats. He said every legal scholar wanted Roe overturned, abortion returned to the states. Legal scholars have told me directly this is not true. He said the U.S. currently has the biggest budget deficit ever. No, that happened under Trump in 2020. He said the U.S. currently has a record trade deficit with China. That also happened under Trump in 2018. He said Biden personally gets a lot of money from China. Zero evidence of this. He said there were no terror attacks during his presidency. In fact, there were multiple attacks. He said Iran didn't fund Hamas, Hezbollah, other terror groups under his presidency. Iran, in fact, did. He said Biden wants to quadruple people's taxes. That is pure fiction. He said the U.S. has provided way more aid to Ukraine than Europe had. It's actually the opposite. He said the U.S. has provided about $200 billion in Ukraine aid. It's closer to $110 billion. He said 18 or 19 million people have crossed the border under Biden. That is millions too high. He said many of these migrants are from prisons or mental institutions. His own campaign cannot corroborate this.
Well, the instinctive reaction of many is, given this fact-checking didn't happen in the debate and was broadcast just before midnight, does it really serve any purpose? Is anyone listening to that who is undecided, and have they changed their minds? The problem is it's been allowed to be baked in that Trump lies without consequences, with his supporters either disregarding his lies or even being amused by them, or simply deciding that they don't know what's true or not, because the truth has been sufficiently allowed to be muddied. Now, let's listen to this key moment when Donald Trump accuses Biden of not being genocidal enough and uses Palestinian as a term of abuse. So a more shameless and honest version of the rampant anti-Palestinian racism which defines the Western political and media elites.
Israel and Hamas. Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one who wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
Now, the key problem is whatever you and I think about Donald Trump, in my case, a deceitful, racist, far-right demagogue, is irrelevant in this debate, of course. Let's park what we think about the politics of Joe Biden. The US electorate have looked at this debate and they have concluded that Joe Biden has suffered an acute cognitive decline and is simply not capable of being president of the United States. They believe that his decline is already severe enough now, but they wonder what the situation is going to be like in a year's time. That is putting aside his political record, not least his complicity in genocide, which has angered key natural constituencies of the Democratic Party's electoral coalition. And the Democratic establishment, the sorts of people who like to style themselves as the grown-ups in the room, have brought us, that is the world, to this point. Let's listen to this.
on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country.
Brutal stuff there from Donald Trump, who I always say should have been a drag queen rather than a far-right demagogue. I think the world would have been a happier place. Can we just listen here as an example to Joe Biden's response on abortion rights?
President Biden?
It's been a terrible thing, what you've done. The fact is that the vast majority of constitutional scholars supported Roe when it was decided. Supported Roe. And that's this idea that they're all against it is just ridiculous. And this is the guy who says the state should be able to have it. We're in a state where in 6 weeks, you don't even know whether you're pregnant or not, but you cannot see a doctor, and have him decide on what your circumstances are, whether you need help. The idea that states are able to do this is a little like saying we're going to turn civil rights back to the states, let each state have a different rule. Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by an immigrant coming in, they talk about that. But here's the deal. There's a lot of young women are being raped by their in-laws, by their spouses, brothers and sisters, it's just ridiculous, and they can do nothing about it. And they try to arrest them when they cross state lines.
Thank you.
What the hell was that? What the hell was that? Then his closing statement.
Everything that comes into the United States of America. What I did, when, for example, he wants to get rid of the ability of Medicare for us to be able to negotiate drug prices with the big pharma companies. Well, guess what? We got it down to $35 for insulin instead of $400. No more than $2,000 for every senior, no matter how much prescription they need. You know what that did? That reduced the federal debt by $160 billion over 10 years.
What do you even say? What do you even say? According to one briefing by a Biden ally, the problem was that his team over-prepared him for the debate. Yes, well, over-prepared. That's one way of putting it. The Democratic Party establishment is in a state of panic. Let's have a listen.
Minutes into the debate, and it continues right now. It involves party strategists. It involves elected officials. It involves fundraisers. And they're having conversations about the president's performance, which they think was dismal, which they think will hurt other people down the party in the ticket. And they're having conversations about what they should do about it. Some of those conversations include, should we go to the White House and ask the president to step aside? Other of the conversations are about, should prominent Democrats go public with that call? Because they feel this debate was so terrible. They do say, in moments in the debate later, the president got better and got his footing, but then at the end, even his closing statement was a little halting. The contrast between the two candidates. Let me be clear. None of them, and a lot of Republicans, don't think Donald Trump had a great night. Donald Trump broke the fact-check machine more than I can count tonight. That will be on the record as we go forward. He refused to answer some very specific and direct questions about his conduct, about January 6th and what all. So that will be dealt with out there. And sometimes there's a parallel universe between the political elites and the American people. It'd be nice to see what the voters say. But I can tell you, it started minutes in. It started with the first couple of answers, and it has continued throughout the night from a, oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God, to what do we do about this? And it involves very senior people in the Democratic Party, including elected officials, saying we have a problem.
And just to co-sign what John is saying, I mean, the panic that I am hearing from
centrist pro-Biden pundits have abandoned him. In the New York Times, Thomas Friedman, one of the biggest supporters in the US media of Joe Biden, writes a piece entitled, "President Biden is my friend, he must bow out of the race." And here's a quote from Politico. One advisor to major Democratic Party donors said they were texting from a meeting of donors in Atlanta on Thursday night, some writing WTF. That is, what the fuck. Our only hope is that he bows out, we have a brokered convention, or dies, the donor advisor said. Otherwise, we are fucking dead. Can we just rewind a little bit here? Record scratch. How did we get here? How did we get here indeed? So in 2016, after allowing, I would say, the economic conditions of the United States to deteriorate so that a certain section of the US could become susceptible to right-wing populism, as well as those who are just susceptible to just racism, the so-called sensibles, the grown-ups in the room, the centrists, or in other words, the corporate democratic establishment, threw everything at breaking Bernie Sanders' campaign, even though the polling showed Clinton was toxic and Sanders had a much better shot at defeating Donald Trump. In 2020, that same establishment went for Bernie Sanders again when he had come top in primaries, ensuring other candidates dropped out to coalesce around Joe Biden. Now, politics aside, it has been extremely clear for a very long time that Biden has had an acute cognitive decline. I mean, we know that because we have eyes and ears, and the decline has been steep. Many of us prefer not to talk about it because we prefer to talk about politics, and we're more focused on the fact that Joe Biden, or rather his team, are facilitating one of the worst atrocities of our time, Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. And sure, we're also aware that if you talk about it, then you're liable to be accused of indulging in Trump talking points. The point I would say is the people around him certainly know that he has had this acute decline because they work with him every day up close. So they have conspired to cover up, to keep from the American people this reality. And what were they thinking? What were they thinking? Because they knew they were going to have these presidential debates. Did they think it would go really well? I went to bed last night. I didn't watch the debate live. I went to debate last night. And my presumption was that it was going to go very badly for Joe Biden. And I woke up, checked the headlines immediately, and without having looked at anything, I started from, how bad was that for Biden? How many times did he mess it up? I don't work for the guy. I'm not his advisor. I'm not seeing him close up every single day. I have seen enough, though, to know it wasn't going to go well. And it wasn't that out of line with my expectations. Now, the Democratic Party establishment, Biden's team, have kept him there because they fear, for one thing, that if he steps aside, his vice president, Kamala Harris, will run, and that they believe she will definitely lose to Donald Trump. So in other words, they voluntarily put someone in as vice president, as a backup to the president, who they do not trust as plan B if it all went wrong with Biden. What do you even say about that? What do you even say? I mean, even going back to 2019, 2020, there were concerns. There were concerns in 2020, weren't there? Before they made their vice presidential pick. They also knew he was quite old. So you also know that he's likely to want to stand a second time. So you kind of think, don't mess up the VP choice in that case, because that person is quite likely to take over. So if you don't think, forget what I think about Kamala Harris, not actually that interesting or relevant. These are the grown-ups in the room. Remember that. Now, there are those speaking with much sadness that Biden is a decent man, but he has to step down for the sake of the country. Let's just be clear here. Joe Biden is not a decent man. Biden has armed and backed a genocide. That is incompatible with being a decent guy. He facilitated, from day one, Israel's genocidal onslaught against the Palestinian people. It would not be possible. All the horrors you have witnessed would not have been possible without his role. That, above all else, was why he was unfit for high office. Now, the polls show that most Democratic voters quite rightly believe Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. These voters are being guilt-tripped into voting for someone they believe is facilitating genocide, and who is also, on top of that, physically not capable of being president, on the grounds he's the lesser evil. And a tragic indictment, that is, of what is called American democracy. Biden has facilitated one of the great crimes of our age, and that is how he should always be remembered, and I suspect it will be. But this is a catastrophe, a self-evident catastrophe. The future of the American Republic, the only superpower on earth, is in grave danger. There's no question. The prospect of a right-wing dictatorship in the United States is very real, and so is civil war. If you had said that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people, quite rightly, would have thought you're a lunatic. Who thinks that now? If I say that there's a genuine prospect of a right-wing dictatorship and civil war in the United States of America, is your instinctive reaction to go, chill out, Owen, let's tone down the hyperbole. Things are pretty bad, but they're not that bad. You don't think that, do you? Of course you don't. Because it is a realistic possibility. And that's not something you can say about the United States since the last civil war, which was in the 19th century, over slavery. This is at a time when right-wing authoritarian movements are on the march across the global north, not least in France. Well, look, I've been commissioned to write a book called The Fall of the West, and there was no shortage of material. Grim. We always wanted a world which wasn't dominated by US power, but in favour of something else, not the authoritarianism and right-wing demagoguery, and also chaos filling the vacuum, which is what I'm afraid currently beckons. Biden clearly has to step down for someone else, but it may now be too late. Thanks to those who style themselves as the sensibles, the moderates, the grown-ups in the room, thanks to those people, there's every chance of Trump triumphing. And what then follows could be very dark indeed. And that, my friends, is on the people who made this possible. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do share. Help us take on the dire media that we have at patreon.com/OJS84. We will be going to the United States for the elections later this year and doing a whole host of videos. So I'm looking forward for that, I think. I'm not sure that's the right way of phrasing it. I'll speak to you soon.